Hello and welcome to GCSE Sociology Question and Answer Episode 2. Our last episode was really well received and I hope this one's going to be even better. So I've selected 10 questions out of about the 50 or 60 that came in over this week, and the rest of your questions have all been answered on our Google Classroom because they mostly related to resources. Please check out the other videos on the channel because I had a lot of questions about research methods, I had a lot of questions about mass media, and a lot of questions about how to apply different perspectives in the exam. There are lots of different videos there, so if you search back through the channel and look for the things that you need, I'm sure you'll find the answer. Thank you very much again to everyone. I was really impressed with the questions and really impressed with how people have been working this week, so let's keep that up. Okay, our first question was a really nice and simple one. What is strain theory? Now, the first thing I did was find the best answer online that I could. So thank you to tutor2u.net who had this wonderful explanation. Strain theory is how Merton relates anime to society. So we're looking in the crime and deviance section mostly, also social stratification really. So writing in 1938, Merton was talking a lot about the American dream. And if you think of things like status frustration too, it's this sense that a lot of people in society, there's all these pressures on them. They're encouraged to be successful, particularly in America. They're told anyone can be successful. Meritocracy is there for everyone, but not everyone can be successful. We can't all be at the top. Otherwise, you've got a very flat society structure, and that's not how capitalism works. That's not how our societies work. So strain theory really is the idea that there's all these pressures on us, and some will then turn to anime because they can't succeed. And individuals will adapt, they'll make certain sacrifices, or they'll accept their position, or they'll turn to crime. So really strain theory is the notion that those who aren't successful feel various amounts of pressure for different reasons, and their responses then dictate who they are and what they do. The second question was simply define delinquency, and I thought this linked really well because delinquency is a functionalist idea. If you think about Cohen and his modern rockers study in moral panic, he's talking about delinquency here. It's an old-fashioned word, but it really means youth crime or youth deviance. And really it's applied to young white working class men. So you may want to think about how that would change today. Think about the discussions we've had around knife crime and that being racialized. But essentially it's this idea that lower class men, they misbehave. They turn to crime because it gives them status. And you can make a lovely contrast with Willis's study in the lads here. So in your crime essays, in your social strat essays, even in your education essays, there may be space to bring those in as a compare and contrast. But really it's this idea that because of how men are socialised, they'll turn to things like vandalism, to edge work such as joyriding or shoplifting or whatever it may be, certain forms of gang culture to prove their masculinity or to satisfy their boredom and improve their status in their own social circle, their own subculture. This next question led on really nicely, and I've put it on the next part of the video because it's a slightly subtler question. Which are the most or least important of the 5 ways individuals respond to success, and why? Now, the person who asked this, you didn't mention Merton, but I presume it's his deviance typology, as we call it at A level. For GCSE, we look at it in terms of anime and the 5 ways in which people respond to success. You have conformity, innovation, ritualism, retreatism, and rebellion. Now, there are no most and least important. What I would look at is the context in which you want to talk about it. You will not get a question where you're expected to break down all 5 and put them into context and give examples. You may want to pick one. You may want to talk about rebellion or conformity, I would suggest. People either they accept what society wants from in terms of culture and how they can get it, and they conform, work hard at school, get a good job. Or the very opposite, they don't accept it and they find new means and new goals for rebellion. And that's really where they would turn to crime and deviance, you could argue. So following on from our previous questions, I guess for ease and for simplicity, conformity and rebellion are the ones I would speak about if I had to. and I felt I understood them well enough to put in an essay, I wouldn't get too hung up on this. I would show a general understanding of Merton's ideas, and I would relate them to Marxism or feminism or whatever is appropriate for the question. The second question was really interesting. I've only talked about A-level sociologists in one lesson once, and the reason for that is there are so many studies at GCSE. You can look at A-level sociologists, but I think that may make life harder for you if you're doing that. What I would suggest, if you go on Seneca Learning and try some of the quizzes, you may pick up some A-level material which is a bit more useful to stretch and challenge you. And that's not that I'm suggesting you shouldn't be ambitious or look ahead. What I'm merely saying is there are so many studies. Learning extra ones at A-level will not get you any marks. If anything, it may make an examiner think you haven't learned the right things. So I would be very careful about that. I would try and aim for A-level development and A-level writing detail and depth if possible. But in terms of particular studies, there aren't any really that you're not doing, because the other modules at A-level aren't modules on this exam, such as health and things like that. Okay. This next one wasn't a question, it read more like a diary essay or a confession, but I read it and was really happy actually, because so many students have this problem and they're too scared to admit it, or they're too shy. So I need help with context, as I believe my writing structure is fine, however my context and lack of understanding questions stops me getting marks. The first thing I would say is understanding questions, that comes down to bugging them, underlining the keywords and thinking, what do those keywords mean? Where have I learnt those before? What lessons have I come across these? What resources? So it's maybe a little bit of literacy training and going through your glossaries. It might be a case of thinking, well, if certain sociologists use this keyword, say it's a word that functionalists use or a word that Marxists use, something like ruling class ideology is a Marxist term, for example. Well, what do they mean by that? And what do the functionalists or feminists respond to with that? So that would be what I would look at. It's the who, what, where, when and why ideas with each question, with each keyword. So you may want to mind map that a little bit. Some of the mocks we got, people had written sociological studies in the top corner of the essays, which I thought was really clever and really good. There's nothing stopping you doing that. The other thing I would say for essays especially is case studies. Yes, you have 25 different sociological studies to learn, but if you're doing, for example, different alternatives to the nuclear family, well, a kibbutz is a case study, house shares are a case study, residential homes are a case study. They're all households or living arrangements outside of the family. Or you may want to look at specific people. You may want to look at the PMT case, Lombroso, Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be hanged in Britain, or Derek Bentley, one of the last men to be hanged in Britain who had special needs. You know, those are case studies we've looked at in lessons where you can cite specific people, specific instances. Because something like social strat is so broad and family is quite broad as well, it's very difficult to suggest that. You may want to look at particular laws. So education acts are really good. The Butler Act of 1944, you know, the tripartite system, the 11 plus grammar schools, that's a good case study to use. So if you're looking for context and lack of understanding, I would look at case studies, or I would break down who would talk about it, what would they say, when are they writing. You know, functionalists are writing very early on. Marx is writing in the industrial period. You know, how was Victorian Britain very different to the 1950s and the sort of housewife breadwinner model compared to modern day Britain, you know, the 7-class system. So you can use that as a thread through all of your sociology and think about time and place. That will really help your essays. And I see that a lot with students that struggle with this. They lack those elements to their questions. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, please contact me again and let me know, and I will try my best to help you. Can you do some flashcards that I can take home? Yes, I can. I've made flashcards. I can put those on the Google Classroom. I've got different styles, different types, whether it's keyword studies, content, whatever it may be. Please come and see me if this was your question and let me know which type you'd want. If this wasn't your question but you're thinking flashcards are a good idea, please come and see me and let me know which type you'd want, and I can get those printed and arranged for you. I simply haven't because I don't know who wants what. What studies can we use for mass media questions? This was really common, and I've done a mass media video a couple of weeks ago, so I will put that link in the comments. Quite simply, it's all there for you. When it comes to actual studies, you won't need any really from the 25 you need to know. What I would say is have a general grasp of what functionalists, feminists and Marxists would say. So how the mass media presents women in terms of feminists, how they present class in terms of Marxists and status and ideals, and then functionalists, how they reflect social norms and values and conventions and institutions. That would be the general understanding that I would look for. And the final question, who believes there are 7 classes? Well, this is relatively new theory. This isn't particularly Marxist or feminist or functionalist, I guess. You may want to argue that functionalists would adopt this because they talk about value consensus. It's really a modern trend which the BBC were picking up, and that's where we were looking at it, if you remember in lessons. It's sort of a postmodern, I guess you could argue, idea that we were away from upper middle and lower class or working class. So who believes there are 7 classes? Well, it depends. You may want to line the precariat up as the underclass from Murray's study. That might be a good comparison. The elites with the bourgeoisie in Marxism. That would be an easy way to do it. Really, it's a new development that you can just show the examiner you really know your stuff with, as long as you explain it like I have, I guess, and use a bit of context and deal with what's gone before. Remember, most of our studies, the latest one is something like 1998, so before your lifetime, probably if you're doing the GCSE exam. So you won't have any contemporary sociology really to throw in there, whether you're using any of the studies that you need to know. Is there a structure that you can get full marks on item questions? Any advice or tips? To the first part, not really, no. And to the second part, yes. If it's a 2-mark question, point explain generally. So again, with items, it's a who, what, where, when, why, and how. Make sure you're looking at who's writing it. Is it official statistics? Is it a functionalist, a Marxist, a feminist, etc.? What are they saying? Is there a trend on the graph? Is it going up? Is it going down? There might be squiggles up and down, but what's the overall pattern? Does it start higher or lower? And what does that mean? You might want to think about why they're writing it, when they're writing it. If it's data from the 1800s, or if it goes from 1950 to present day, that's changed over time. So what does that mean? My advice would be point explain. In the source, here is the pattern, here is the trend, here is the belief, here is the idea. This means that. Simple as that. The real key here is, with all of these questions, to be as concise as possible whilst getting every mark. So that's why we do point, evidence, explain and link as our structures. That's why we don't freeform it. A lot of people will give me half a page for a 3-mark answer. That's just a waste of your time. You can get the 3 marks with 3 simple sentences or 2 longer, more complex sentences. Same with item questions. My advice and my tips would be, make sure you read it. Make sure you mention data if it's a research methods question. Quantitative or qualitative, reliable or valid, that gets you marks. So always put that in. If it's to do with perspectives, make sure you mention functionalist, feminist, Marxist. If it's to do with methods, make sure you mention the method. Simple as that. Read the question carefully, go put that detail in and explain it, and that's the 2-mark question done. 4-mark question, it's point, evidence, explain, link it back to what the question is looking for. Some of the item questions are a little bit trickier because they might actually be 2 questions mixed to one. So it might be, here's the trend, here's why. Here's the study, here's what it means. Here's the method, here's what it means. So point, explain, point, explain. I would practice item questions until you feel comfortable with those if they're an issue. This wasn't a question, someone just wrote self-report studies on a postcard and put it in the box. So Self-report studies often get confused with victim surveys. So we're looking at crime again here. Self-report studies are where criminals or suspects are asked to anonymously tick off or give details on what crimes they may have committed or what things they've done. Obviously, ethical considerations come into play here. You have to keep them anonymous, you have to keep them confidential. This relates to the dark figure and the difference between recorded crime and the levels of crime actually happening. So that's where self-report studies fit in. Again, if you need further detail, please check out my Crime and Deviance video. I go into this in a lot more detail. Ethical considerations, go to my research methods video, or see me in class, or look at the Google Classroom for the resources I put up. I hope that answers your question on self-report studies and ethical considerations and everything else that you needed. Thank you everyone who put a question in today. I really appreciate it. It's given me lots of things to think about. And check out the Google Classroom, because I hope between all of you in all of the year groups I've answered your questions well enough and I've given you enough resources to do that.